I care more that you have a life worth living. And part of a life worth living, I think, embodies having a healthy body weight in a useful body that works for a long time.
Now, do I need to eat organic to be healthy?
If I remember correctly, organizations and or the government use organic as a label to describe the type of farming practices. Although in principle, nutrition quality can vary with varying farming practices, that if you get a huge variety of different foods, you can hedge your bets. Now, from a nutrition standpoint, I would say that the differences between farming methods in the United States, the foods you can get in the United States and the chains that we have, etc., that I consider it something that you can overlook, especially if you get a high variety of foods. Some of which maybe you randomly get some organic food, maybe you like the flavor, etc.
I also only eat local organic produce.
From the other farming practices side with the other chemicals that they use, again, even organic farming allows pesticides and things like that. So if you want to look more into that stuff, you can. But really, I have a hard time subscribing to organic food as the label exists now, with the conditions that you use that label, has a necessarily superior quality to it that would lead to a practical difference in daily living.
So should the average person worry about that when they're going there shopping?
I would say that in quite a few cases, I have enjoyed the flavor of the organic food more, and I might buy an organic food more often for that reason, that it may have a different texture or a slightly different flavor.
Sounds delicious.
And sure, that may actually indicate the differences in nutrients or whatever, but again, if you hedge your bets with a large variety of foods, that kind of moots. So do you worry about getting organic food? No. If you happen to get an organic food and you like the taste, great, keep getting it. If you want to support those types of farming practices, go ahead, get it. If you want to avoid specific types of pesticides, I understand. I would urge you to educate yourself as a consumer to figure out what exactly organic means these days. And when you get an understanding of what the label actually means and who actually follows up on that label and how, that you may strengthen your conviction or you may change your conviction to something else. So I will actually put that on you to decide.
Are plant-based diets better for my health?
Ooh, good question. Are plant-based diets better for my health? I would say, actually, under perfect conditions, no. Under perfect conditions, I would say no, because you would get the optimal diet from a wide variety of foods, some of which would include meat.
Where's the meat?
Or formulated. Like, does plant-based mean has mostly plants or only plants? Only plants. Want to start that website, only plants. This is kind of a tricky question. So I would say that has less to do with are plant-based diets healthier and more to do with high amounts of saturated fat for a very long time correlates to worse health than diets with more plants in them. I think high amounts of saturated fat for a long time, or for some people very little depending on your genetics, maybe raises the risk for certain things. Now, the cost benefit of saturated fat for like, well, if it keeps you fuller for longer and you maintain a healthier body weight because of it, that sort of stuff may cancel, maybe not, depending on the person. So overall, I would say that the question has less to do with plant-based diets from a practical application standpoint and maybe more to do with like saturated fat. That can kind of like, okay, this makes plant-based diets automatically superior because they have low saturated fat content. And, you know, I could always learn more about it. So, you know, what does health mean? Blah, blah, blah. And again, I take the general consensus that if you maintain a healthy body weight, if you have high levels of fitness, and if you get a wide variety of foods, a lot of these questions about which is healthier, I will actually say I just care very little. Like, do I care to get the optimal diet? I personally do not, and I know other people do. I care more that you have a life worth living. And part of a life worth living, I think, embodies having a healthy body weight in a useful body that works for a long time. And I think people confuse that with how can I live as long as possible. You can live to 150, I made that up. You can live well over 100, and that differs from how long I stay useful as a human versus how long my heart keeps beating. And I would much rather you kept your heart into something for 90 years than lived for 90 years and had your heart into something for 60. Because to me, you already died 30 years ago. For me personally, I just care very little about what can I do to live as long as humanly possible, because what it would take to live as long as humanly possible would interfere with the things that make life worth living for a vast majority of people. And for that reason, I put limited intellectual efforts into figuring out what would make me live the longest. So I would lean on healthy body weight, high cardiovascular fitness, a wide variety of foods, and that will probably take people much further than any of the other bickering happening.
Does intermittent fasting live up to the hype?
For some people it does. So intermittent fasting lives up to the hype of some people because the hype came from somewhere. And I would say that the hype came from people that intermittently fasted and got fantastic results and therefore hyped it up more than it got hyped up ahead of time and tried to get sold to people. Because does anybody buy intermittent fasting? No. They may buy things that talk about intermittent fasting. And so to me, like, the idea of intermittent fasting spread because people got results with it. Now, does that mean intermittent fasting in and of itself caused those results? Again, that depends on who you ask. From a biochemical standpoint, I would say no. From a behavioral standpoint, I would say absolutely. And I think people sort of kind of ignore the value of behavior in health fitness in general, especially people with a background like mine. I make a concerted effort to try and talk more in terms of practical side of things, that intermittent fasting changes behavior, and those behavior changes can lead to other positive changes, which, strictly speaking, I would attribute to the intermittent fasting. For instance, if you weigh 250 pounds and then you start to intermittently fast and you lose 25 pounds, did intermittent fasting cause that? I would say from a behavior standpoint, yes. From a biochemical standpoint, I would say no. From a biochemical standpoint, it occurred because you ate fewer calories than before. And people try to use that as a way to like debunk intermittent fasting. But really, if you employ a technique and it changes your behavior and those behavior changes make your life better, well then yeah, that sounds like I would hype it too. With the way that I operate specifically, I like to measure things. And so if you eat 2,000 calories per day, where you eat 4 meals evenly spaced versus 2 meals lumped together at the end of the day or at the earlier part of the day, you will have negligible differences overall because you measured the key performance indicators here. And so for people that obviate more fastidious measuring systems, for many of those people, if they fast for half the day, that might just mean they ate half the food, which people use to debunk intermittent fasting. But again, that means it had an effect on your behavior that then has a positive outcome for you, which thumbs up. Does that necessarily point to the sustainability of that sort of practice? Maybe it does, maybe not. So I would say that, does the fasting in and of itself generate the results people talk about? No, although it does lead to behavior changes that do, and I feel okay with that.
If this was helpful, you probably want to know how fast you can get jacked. So watch this video next.